So good afternoon once again. Thank you very, very much for your excellent keynote address yesterday. It was very well received, and we really appreciate you taking the time now also to share a few words with us, where we'd love to follow up on some of the topics of yesterday, maybe ask you a few new questions as well. I'd like to begin with a few questions regarding, I think, maybe one of the biggest concerns on our mind every day now as we wake up in the morning, the current situation with the Ukraine and Russia. I am a relatively young person. I don't remember in my lifetime having really the same level of concern that I have now, as I really don't know, regarding the security that will be there 1 or 2 years from now for my 3 children, etc., here in Germany, in Berlin. And I just wanted to ask your opinion. First of all, what do you think is going on with the Ukraine and Russia? Is this Ukraine-Russia? Is this Russia against the West, has been announced by Putin? First of all, framing-wise, what kind of a conflict is this? And then I'd love to hear your reflections as well. How might you imagine, this airplane coming down safely? In the sense, is it within the power of negotiation at all? Is it only about the hard power component? And as a final question, I'd love to hear your opinion also regarding cultural diplomacy. I had a number of conversations yesterday with former heads of state. One of them said, no, cultural diplomacy can do nothing, soft power can do nothing, it's only about the military aspect. So I'd love to hear your reflections there as well. Is there some sort of a rule, maybe not with Russia, Ukraine itself, but within Europe, where cultural diplomacy could offer some support?
Thank you very much for having me. It's been really great to be here to speak with the students, with other speakers. So it's a great event. So thank you very much for that invitation. I chose also for the conference, I chose the topic which was related to the situation in Ukraine, because we in Estonia, we are very much concerned. Estonia is a neighboring country, and Estonia has historic reasons to be afraid of Russia's actions. And it is very unfortunate that over the last 2 decades already we have seen that Russia has become a more authoritarian country and more aggressive towards its neighbors. Let me recall that in 2008 Russia attacked Georgia. In 2014 Russia attacked Ukraine the first time, and now for the second time, and it started a full-scale war in Europe. The war which we have not seen in Europe since the Second World War. Of course, also the wars in Balkans were very tragic, so we admit this as well. But these wars in the 90s should have been already lessons learned for Europe, that it's important to have very firm stance towards the countries who do not respect international law. At the moment, I think it is really important that the international community comes together and pushes back Russia's aggression. And of course, it is very important that all the war crimes in Ukraine will be taken to the court, to the international court, to the court of the ICC. Crimes of aggression will be punished, and justice is brought back to the international arena. Estonia has been really advocating for the victory of Ukraine. What do we mean by the victory? We mean that Ukraine really regains its territorial integrity within the territories of the internationally recognized borders. And of course, as we have seen so many damages of the cities, of the civilian infrastructure, of the killings of thousands and thousands of civilians, it also means that Russia is responsible for these crimes and damages, and it means also that Russia has to help to cover, to rebuild Ukraine. As you had quite many questions in a row, so
regarding the cultural diplomacy aspects.
Yes, I think that in this current situation, it's a bit too early for cultural diplomacy. But as the wounds of Ukrainian people are very deep because of this war, because of the killings, rape and torturing, I assume that it takes at least two generations before these two nations are able to speak to each other again. And in some point, I believe that cultural diplomacy has a role to help to really have a connection between these two nations again. And I think it's really a bit similar what we saw after the second of the World War, that it took more than a generation when nations started to discuss to each other. And as I was ambassador in the Czech Republic in 2018, then Austria and Czech Republic came up with a joint history book. It happened in 2018, quite many years after the Second World War.
Poland and Germany, I still haven't succeeded. I remember for a long time there was discussion again about a Polish-German, but I still don't think they've succeeded. A history book. But, no, but thank you very much. Please, if you'd like to.
So outside of this war between Russia and Ukraine, what do you think are some other major challenges that the EU will face in the coming 6 months, 1 year, 10 years?
Thank you very much for this question. Of course, there are so many challenges that our countries face and also the EU faces. And some of the challenges are related to the war in Ukraine and to Russia's aggression. For example, the energy crisis, high prices, inflation, all the problems that are related to the economic situation of our countries. But I think that as our countries or people in our countries are doing relatively well, the economic slowdown is not the biggest problem for our people. Other challenges, therefore, are related to environment. This is definitely something where we have to pay more attention so that we could leave a better world for our children and grandchildren. Other than that, of course, terrorism is still a big issue, especially in southern part of, in the southern neighborhood of the European countries, and this is something where we definitely have to work together. And of course, I would like to come back to the security-related issues. Then cybersecurity is a new challenge where we have to cooperate together. But also disinformation, decline of democracy around the globe. So there are many challenges where the EU member states should work together this year and also in forthcoming years.
Absolutely. And continuing on that note of security and alliances, NATO itself, do you think that the West can trust NATO in these times of tension? And what would, in your perspective, would be NATO's greatest weakness today?
Definitely, I believe that we can trust NATO, and in Estonia we really believe in NATO, and we are really thankful to NATO because NATO has increased its presence in Estonia because of the weakened security situation in Europe, and this is very important for us. And the leading country is the United Kingdom in Estonia, but there are also other countries present like France, Iceland, etc. So we think that NATO is really very relevant in current security situation. What I would like to see more in NATO, I would like to see more like-mindedness, and also, for example, at the moment in our region, in Baltic region, we think that it is really important to quickly ratify the access protocol of Sweden and Finland, but not every ally has ratified these protocols yet. So this is something which I hope that NATO overcomes quickly and we could see a really strong and united alliance.
Of course. And some other tension in the world right now is between China and the West. And this is growing and becoming more and more prominent in our everyday life. So what is yours and Estonia's position on this tension between China and the West?
China is, of course, one of the biggest world powers, and it is really important that China would be also as an example in following the international law, also as a member of the United Nations Security Council, and also that China would respect human rights. it is really crucial that China would allow High Representative for Human Rights to visit the zones in China which have been problematic, and more democratic governance would be also very much appreciated, and yeah, it would be good to see China also cooperating more regionally with neighbors in a friendly manner.
Absolutely. And now looking onto the future and how we can fix these issues and these tensions in our world. As a woman in politics, as a person with experience, what is your message and your hopes for the younger generation to push us in this right direction?
I think that here I would like to come back to the fundamental freedoms and human rights issues. And I think that if every person really stands for these fundamental values, it would really help to create a world where it is much better for everyone. Democratic elections, media freedom, these are the values which I think that everyone should try to support and protect.
Absolutely. I'd
love to come back for a moment to more or less the first question I asked you, but leaving out Ukraine-Russia, the cultural diplomacy aspect. When I was an undergraduate at Columbia University in New York, I wanted to do an internship at an institute for cultural diplomacy. And I went to my boss at the time. I was working at the French Embassy, their cultural services. And he told me there is nothing like the ICD out there. There's no institute dealing with cultural diplomacy as such. He says, Mark, I think you should open one. And really, thanks to his helping hand, over the years, we then were able to create what is now the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy. And I've noticed in that time frame a lot has changed. How one defines cultural diplomacy, the importance of cultural diplomacy, and of course the world in which we live, where I would argue today there's maybe more of a need for cultural diplomacy than even 10 years ago, as you see growing fragmentation between Republicans and Democrats in the US, different political parties in Europe, Brexit. So my first question to you, in a very international way, what is cultural diplomacy?
What is cultural diplomacy? Yeah. Okay, you are definitely a much better expert on that, but I would say that cultural diplomacy is where countries add a cultural element into their or above their bilateral relations. For example, Estonia has cultural attaches in quite many countries. One of them which comes into my mind is in Paris, another one is in Brussels, one is in New York. So we try to have our cultural representatives in, of course, in Finland as well, in many places where we would like to introduce our culture so that other people would know more about Estonia, which kind of people we are, which kind of habits do we have, which kind of traditions do we have, and I think that it helps to really build the bridges between countries and nations, and also it is important to increase the tolerance, because I think that the more people know about each other, the more tolerant they are towards each other.
Okay, thank you for that. As a related question, again, as I see from the time I founded the ICD up until today, a progression. When I first founded the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy, I was very cautious in terms of where it's appropriate to do cultural diplomacy. And I said, okay, if you have two countries that are at peace, two countries that are friends, go for it. Erasmus, academic exchange, no problems. I was very hesitant to touch conflict zones. And I said, okay, if there's a war, if there's a conflict, leave it. Better not to do that. Then the more I learned, the more research we did, I learned about the case of Rwanda. I learned about the case of South Africa. I learned about the case of Israel-Palestine today, where it is possible to do cultural diplomacy, even when a conflict is going on, whether it's being killed with machetes in the case of Rwanda, or the very, very complicated situation in Israel and Palestine through sports, through music, through different mediums. And I think that was very inspirational for me to say, actually, it is possible. So I would just be curious to ask you, where do you think cultural diplomacy can appropriately be used? Is this something really just amongst friends? Because some would also say it's not necessary amongst friends. If we have good relations, there's no need. Invest the cultural diplomacy elsewhere. So what would you say? Where should we be focusing the efforts of cultural diplomacy? Where is it appropriate? Where maybe not appropriate?
I think that it is very broad and complicated question, but thank you very much for thinking of these issues, because as we spoke before, there are situations in the world where there is no place for good bilateral relations or good stance for diplomacy. And it's really the question how to start to build bridges between these kind of countries and nations. I think that the first you have to have justice in place. For example, when we speak about the current Russia's war in Ukraine, then it's a bit too early for cultural diplomacy or sports or for any kind of relations. First, we definitely would like to see justice in place and Ukraine winning back their territorial integrity, etc. After all these events have happened, then and Ukraine is ready, then I think there is place also for cultural diplomacy. I brought this example from Ukraine, and as this is something that happens now in Europe, but I think that this example is also relevant for other places. I think that you cannot have cultural diplomacy before there is the problem is solved between countries or nations, whatever this problem is.
Okay. So then to flip the question, let's leave the conflict zones out and let's look at friendships. European Union, NATO, we mentioned before. The British Council about 10 years ago pulled out of Germany, and they said there's no need for British Council in Germany. Britain's got talent, we have EasyJet. Why are we spending money to promote British culture here? They had a 4-story building on Hackescher Markt in Berlin, very active, open to the public. They totally closed it. They now have 1 floor of a skyscraper in Alexanderplatz, closed to the public. There's a camera. If you have an appointment, you can go in. So what do you think about that in the sense? Should we be investing in our friends? Should we just be focusing on issues where it's a post-conflict situation? Or what about our friends, so to speak, within NATO or within European Union?
That's interesting that you brought up the British Council. I remember that they were very worried about when they were thrown out from Russia. So I think that maybe among the friendly countries, a big presence is not that important, but I personally think that it is good to have also among friendly countries more cultural connections. Of course, it's difficult to assess what was exactly behind this concrete example that you draw, but I truly think that all the film festivals that we organize and invite each other movies to participate, they are really good. They help really to make good connections between the people.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. You've been very generous with your time and for sharing your great wisdom and experience. And we very much hope we can see you again soon at the ICD Academy.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.